Well, hey, I am in my kitchen again and I just got done freeze drying some tomatoes, and so today I thought I would share with you the process for freeze drying tomatoes as well as how we personally like to use them once they're freeze dried. Well, if this is your first time here, my name is Brianna and my husband Gray and I like to learn, practice, and teach our children traditional skills. So freeze drying tomatoes isn't actually my preferred method of preserving them. My first and favorite method of preserving tomatoes is to make diced tomatoes in pint-sized jars because I just have it down and how we use those for our family. But once I've hit that amount that we're going to need for the next year, I love to experiment with the produce that's coming out of our garden. And so I like to make 52 jars of diced tomatoes, and then after that I make barbecue sauce, I make ketchup, I'll make freeze-dried tomatoes, and just have fun with the bumper crop, if you will, from the garden. And so today I am going to take you along with me as I freeze-dry them and then share with you how we like to use freeze-dried tomatoes. Let's start with what you're going to need to freeze-dry tomatoes. You're going to need, of course, a home freeze dryer. We have the Harvest Right. If you want to know more about what we think about it, I'll leave you a link down in the description box below. You're going to need a serrated knife. I do not like to cut tomatoes without a serrated knife because I think it helps them hold their shape. So a sharp serrated knife, any kind of Mylar bag or airtight container, and of course oxygen absorbers. And so once you have all of your supplies, go ahead and either harvest your tomatoes or just get them out. I like to wash my tomatoes just to make sure there's not any dirt or debris or anything that shouldn't be on them before I go ahead with my preservation process. The first thing I like to do when I am freeze drying anything is to just start cooling down the freeze dryer tray, because it doesn't take me that long when I'm freeze drying a single ingredient like cherries or tomatoes or bananas. Start by cooling down your freeze dryer chamber. Next, come back in, dry your tomatoes off if you've washed them, and start slicing them. Now you can freeze dry tomatoes in a variety of different shapes. You can even puree the tomatoes and then pour the puree onto the tray. Now this is the best option if you're looking to save space or you don't care about them being intact at all, or you're going to be making something like a tomato paste. This is a really good option to make a puree. Today I'm going to be just freeze drying tomato chunks, and so I'm going to be slicing them fairly thinly in even uniform layers and covering the freeze dryer tray in a single layer. I don't want any of the tomatoes to be stacked on top of each other or they won't dry evenly. Once you have your tomatoes all lined out evenly, go ahead and load your freeze dryer tray and press start. Now our tomatoes took a couple times to run through because tomatoes are a fairly moist food, and so after the first cycle you may need to check them and make sure that they're completely dry. Now once they're completely dry, remove them quickly and get them into an airtight and labeled container along with your oxygen absorbers. And then once you do that, then they will be shelf stable. If you put them in something like a mason jar or a freezer bag, then they'll be shelf stable for a year, so long as you got all the moisture out of them. If they were packed properly in Mylar bags and completely dry, they will be shelf stable for 25 to 35 years. That is the process to freeze drying tomatoes. Now let me share with you our favorite ways to use freeze dried tomatoes. So the first way is very similar to how I used diced tomatoes, and that is to throw them into a soup, a stew, or a chili. Because freeze-dried food rehydrates beautifully, the broth of the soup or the stew will rehydrate them and they will taste fresh. They will taste like you picked them and cut them fresh. You may need to adjust and add a little bit more broth to your soup to compensate for that moisture loss. The next way is to add them to any Italian style pasta dish. And so again, throwing them into something like a red sauce is going to allow them to rehydrate them and give give that sauce a very rich and fresh flavor. And so things like spaghetti sauce or lasagna sauce, we make a no ricotta lasagna that I have linked down below, and that recipe is our favorite. It's our go-to, and it might have an ingredient that surprises you in there. And so back to tomatoes, you can throw them into a pasta sauce, and then the final way, and this way I love so much that I saved it for last, and that is to puree them. You can do this before or after they're freeze-dried, and then reconstitute with a little bit of water and make tomato paste. So this tomato paste is great because you can, especially if you've freeze-dried your tomatoes via a puree before they went into the freeze dryer, you can just grab a tablespoon, mix it with a little bit of water, and you have a tomato paste. I find that when I buy like a can of tomato paste, I like to buy the tubes of tomato paste, but if I have the cans, sometimes that tomato paste will go to waste because I'll only need like a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons, and I won't need the whole can. So having a concentrated freeze-dried tomato powder works so well because you can just use it as you need it. It's not going bad in the refrigerator, and it's super easy to make. I have a free do's and don'ts of freeze-drying ebook, and I will leave that linked down in the description box below. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll see you next time.